The Wyoming wind, a constant mournful song, whispered across Wyatt Reed's ranch. It was late 1870, and the vast open land mirrored the empty spaces in Wyatt's heart. His days were a quiet rhythm of chores, mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and making sure his cabin was ready for the harsh winters. Each task was done with a slow, careful hand, as if rushing might break the fragile peace he had built around his sorrow. He was a man carved from the land itself, weathered and strong, with eyes that held the distant look of someone who had seen too much loss. His wife, Sarah, and their young son, Thomas, had been gone for years, taken by a sickness that swept through the frontier like a cruel dust storm. Their memory was a soft ache, a constant companion that kept him from truly feeling lonely, yet always alone. The ranch, once filled with laughter and the promise of a future, was now a silent monument to what had been. Wyatt rarely spoke, finding more comfort in the lowing of his cattle or the rustle of the tall prairie grass than in human words. His world had shrunk to the boundaries of his property, a safe, predictable circle where he could manage his grief without interruption. He often found himself staring at the horizon, watching the sun dip below the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed too vibrant for his muted life. One afternoon, as Wyatt was tightening a loose board on his porch, a sound drifted on the wind, something different from the usual creaks and groans of his old ranch. It was so soft, he almost thought it was the wind playing tricks. He stopped, his hammer still, and listened harder. The sound came again, a faint whisper, barely there, but clear enough to make the hair on his arms stand up. "Please open it," the voice pleaded, barely a breath. "I can't breathe." Wyatt's heart gave a sudden thump. He looked around his empty yard. There was no one. The sound seemed to come from his old storage shed, a dusty, forgotten building at the far end of his property, usually locked tight. He hadn't been in there for months, maybe even a year. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from a mix of fear and a strange, prickling curiosity. Who could be in there? And how did they get inside a locked shed? He slowly picked up his rifle, a habit from years of living alone in wild country. His boots crunched on the dry earth as he walked towards the shed. Each step felt heavy, leading him away from his safe, quiet world. The shed looked just as it always did, old and leaning, its paint peeling. But now it held a secret, a living plea for help. He paused, his hand hovering over the rusty latch, a knot tightening in his stomach. The whisper came again, weaker this time, a desperate gasp. "Please!" Wyatt's fingers fumbled with the rusted latch, pulling it open with a sharp, protesting squeal. The shed door creaked inward, letting in a sliver of sunlight that danced on dust motes. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of old wood and something else, something damp and fearful. His eyes scanned the dim space, passing over stacks of forgotten tools and dusty crates until they landed on a dark, lumpy shape tucked behind an old wagon wheel. It was a burlap sack, tied tightly at the top. From inside it, a muffled groan escaped. Wyatt's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that shook him, that a person was trapped within. Moving quickly, his rifle momentarily forgotten, he knelt beside the sack. He saw dark stains on the rough fabric and the faint outline of a body curled up inside. With trembling hands, he untied the coarse rope that bound the top, his movements careful and gentle. The sack fell open, revealing a young woman. Her hair was a tangled mess, her face bruised and streaked with dirt, and her eyes, when they fluttered open, held a deep, tired fear. She was Lydia Sawyer, though Wyatt didn't know her name then. Her clothes were torn, and she looked weak, like a broken bird. Wyatt reached out slowly to help her. His touch was hesitant, but kind. He carefully lifted her, feeling how light she was, out of the sack and into the pale light of the shed doorway. She gasped, taking in the fresh air, her body shaking. Wyatt led the young woman, Lydia, slowly towards his cabin. Her steps were unsteady, and he kept a gentle hand on her back, guiding her. The sight of another person in his home, after so many silent years, felt strange, almost like a dream. Inside, he helped her sit on a worn wooden chair by the fire, its embers glowing softly. He fetched a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a small tin of salve he kept for his own scrapes and cuts. As he carefully cleaned the dirt and blood from her face and hands, Wyatt saw the true extent of her hurts. There were angry red marks on her wrists and ankles where ropes had been, and a nasty bruise bloomed on her temple. Her eyes, though wide with fear, also held a spark, a tiny flicker of defiance that surprised him. She was scared, yes, but not broken. There was a toughness in her, a will to live that even her terrible ordeal hadn't extinguished. He worked in silence, his movements practiced and gentle, much like he tended to a wounded animal. He offered her a cup of fresh water, which she drank eagerly, her hands trembling slightly. He noticed how she watched him, her gaze darting, trying to understand this quiet, kind stranger. He didn't ask questions, knowing she needed peace more than answers right now. He simply tended to her, a silent promise of safety in his steady hands. Over the next few days, as Lydia slowly regained her strength, the silence in Wyatt's cabin began to shift. She still flinched at sudden sounds, and her eyes held a haunted look, but the kindness in Wyatt's quiet actions slowly started to melt her fear. One evening, as the fire crackled and cast long shadows, she finally spoke, her voice soft and shaky, like a dry leaf rustling. "My name is Lydia Sawyer," she began, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "I was with them, the Redmouth Riders." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Whispers of a ruthless gang, known for their cruelty and for preying on defenseless travelers, had reached even his secluded ranch. They were said to be taking women, moving them across the vast wild frontier for dark purposes. Lydia explained how they had captured her, how she had been held captive for days, always moving, always scared. She told of a moment of carelessness from one of the riders, a chance to slip away during a stop, and her desperate run into the darkness. She remembered being caught again, beaten, and then stuffed into the sack, left for dead in what she thought was a forgotten place. Her story hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud settling over the quiet room. Wyatt listened, his face showing no outward emotion, but inside a fierce protectiveness began to stir. He looked at her, truly seeing her not just as a hurt stranger, but as a brave soul who had fought for her life. A few mornings later, a cold dread crept over the ranch. Wyatt stepped outside at dawn, ready for his chores, but froze at the sight of his fence post nearest the main trail. Someone had been there. Carved roughly into the wood was a stark, menacing symbol, a crude, jagged mouth, stained with what looked like dried blood. Beneath it, a single word, mine. Wyatt's blood ran cold. This was the mark of the Redmouth Riders. They hadn't given up. They had found their way to his secluded ranch, a place he thought was safe. The message was clear. They knew Lydia was here, or at least they suspected she was close. The quiet peace of his home shattered like glass. The danger was no longer a distant story. It was a shadow lurking on his own land. He walked around the perimeter of his property, his eyes sharp and searching. Near the shed where he found Lydia, another message was etched into the earth with a boot heel. Where is she? The riders had been bold, coming close to his cabin in the dark. They wanted to scare him, to make him give up Lydia. But seeing their cruel mark only strengthened Wyatt's resolve. He would not let them take her. His quiet life was over. Now it was about protection. He knew he had to act fast to hide Lydia before they came back bolder and stronger. Wyatt rushed back to the cabin, his face grim. "They've been here," he told Lydia, his voice low and urgent. "The riders. They left their mark." Lydia's face went pale, her eyes widening with renewed terror. She knew what that meant. They were coming for her. "There's an old storm cellar," Wyatt said, already moving. "It's hidden well beneath the root cellar. No one would think to look there." He grabbed a lantern, some blankets, and a small bag of dried meat and water. Lydia, though still weak, moved with a sudden burst of energy, her fear driving her. They hurried out, Wyatt leading the way to a small, almost invisible wooden door, set into a low mound of earth near the back of his cabin. He lifted the heavy door, revealing a dark, cool space below. "It's not much," he said, "but it's safe. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." He helped her down the rough wooden steps. The air was damp and smelled of earth, but it was a true hiding place. Before he closed the door, he looked into her scared but trusting eyes. "I won't let them get you, Lydia," he promised, his voice firm and steady. "I swear it." The words were simple, but they held the weight of a man who had lost everything and would not lose again. He pulled the heavy door shut, covering it with loose dirt and old branches, making it vanish from sight. With Lydia safely hidden, Wyatt walked back to his cabin, his rifle now held firmly in his hand. He settled onto his porch, trying to look calm, like any rancher enjoying the quiet of his home. He knew they would come. He just didn't know when. The sun was high when a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It grew bigger, faster, until he could see them. 5 rough-looking men on horseback, their faces hard, their clothes dirty. The red-mouthed riders. They rode right up to his fence line, stopping just short of the carved post. Their leader, a big man with a cruel smile and a scar across his cheek, stared at Wyatt. "Heard you might have seen something, old man," the leader sneered, his voice like grinding stones. "A runaway. A girl." Wyatt met his gaze, his face blank. "Ain't seen no one but my cattle for weeks," he said, his voice flat, showing no fear or knowledge. "Just me and the wind out here." Another rider, younger and meaner looking, pointed to the shed. "We found her sack in there. Don't play dumb." "That old shed's been empty for ages," Wyatt replied, shrugging. "Could be anything in there. Wanderers pass through, leave their trash." He kept his hands loose, ready, but his eyes were steady. He wanted them to believe him, to ride away and leave him and Lydia in peace. He just needed to buy time. Down in the dark, cool earth of the storm cellar, Lydia huddled under the blankets, listening. The sounds were muffled, but she could hear the rumble of horses, the rough shouts of men, and then Wyatt's calm, steady voice. He sounded different than she had ever heard him. Firm, unwavering, like a rock in a stormy sea. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone told her he was facing them. The very men who had hurt her and left her to die. A new feeling began to bloom in her chest, warm and unexpected. It was not just relief, but something deeper. Trust. Wyatt, a man who had every reason to turn her away, a stranger with his own quiet sorrows, was risking his safety for hers. He was not big or loud, but his quiet strength, his gentle hands as he tended her wounds, and now his brave stand against the riders, showed her a goodness she hadn't seen in a long time. She thought of his promise, "I won't let them get you, Lydia." He had meant it. Hiding in the dark, she knew he was out there, protecting her. The cellar, once a place of scary darkness, now felt like a safe haven, a small pocket of hope in a world that had seemed only to hold fear. With each minute that passed, her trust in him grew, firm and sure. She realized that this quiet rancher was not just a protector, but a kind soul. Wyatt's act had worked for a little while. The riders eventually rode off, grumbling, convinced for the moment that the old rancher knew nothing, but their departure brought only a brief calm. Wyatt knew they would be back, likely with more men and more anger. He told Lydia this when he let her out of the cellar, his face etched with worry. The next few days were filled with a tense quiet. They ate their meals in silence, always listening for the sound of hooves. The riders returned, not in a large group, but with sneaky visits in the dead of night. They would leave new threats, sometimes a dead rabbit nailed to his barn door with another cruel message, or fresh tracks leading directly to the storm cellar as if to say, "We know." Each new sign tightened the knot of fear in Lydia's stomach, and the lines of worry on Wyatt's face deepened. Yet this shared danger, this constant threat, pulled them closer. They talked more, planning how to face the next threat. Lydia, seeing Wyatt's tireless watchfulness, his quiet determination to protect her, felt her loneliness lessen. Wyatt, with Lydia's brave spirit and her need for his protection, found a purpose that had been missing since his family was gone. Their fear was a shared burden, and in that sharing, they found a strange comfort, a silent promise to face whatever came together. One evening, after another chilling sign from the riders, Wyatt and Lydia sat by the fire, the silence between them heavier than usual. The stakes were too high to simply wait. "We can't keep hiding," Lydia said, her voice quiet but firm. "They won't stop." Wyatt nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "No, they won't." He had been thinking the same thing. Running was not an option for him, not from his home, and he knew Lydia was tired of running. "We have to fight them," he stated, his voice low but clear. Lydia looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Together?" she asked, a flicker of hope mixing with her fear. "Together," Wyatt confirmed. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about protecting their new, fragile connection, the quiet future they might build. They talked late into the night, making plans. Wyatt spoke of his knowledge of the land, the hidden spots, and how to use his rifle. Lydia, in turn, shared her quick thinking and her fierce will to survive, a strength she had found in her darkest moments. They decided they would not just survive, but they would fight for a life free from the shadows of the red-mouthed riders and the loneliness that had marked their pasts. It was a big choice, a scary one, but together it felt possible. They would stand their ground, not just against a gang, but for the hope of a shared tomorrow. The sun rose, painting the sky with fiery colors, but neither Wyatt nor Lydia noticed. They were hidden, waiting. The red-mouthed riders arrived at midday, a larger, angrier group this time, no longer bothering with threats, just pure menace. They spread out, looking for Lydia, kicking at doors and yelling. Wyatt, hidden in a thicket of brush near the barn, took aim with his rifle. He had placed Lydia in a different hiding spot. With a clear view of the ranch and a small pistol he had shown her how to use. He fired his first shot, hitting a barrel near the lead rider, sending wood splinters flying. It was a warning shot, meant to surprise them, not to kill. The riders scattered, confused. That was their chance. Lydia, quick and smart, set off a small, pre-arranged diversion in the old shed, a loud noise that drew 2 riders away. Wyatt used the distraction to move, flanking the remaining gang members. He knew his land, every dip and rise, every shadow. He moved like a ghost, firing strategically, making them believe there were more defenders than just him. Lydia, meanwhile, used her small pistol with courage, aiming for legs or arms to disable, not to kill. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was mixed with a fierce determination. They worked like two parts of a well-oiled machine, each relying on the other, each playing their part in a dance of survival. The riders, used to easy prey, found themselves facing something new. Two people fighting, not just with weapons, but with smarts and a will forged in shared danger. The fight was hard and dusty, a flurry of shouts, gunshots, and quick movements, but the riders, confused and outsmarted by Wyatt's clever tactics and Lydia's surprising bravery, eventually broke. Their leader, roaring in anger, saw his men falling or running, and with a final curse he turned his horse and galloped away, his remaining gang following close behind. The dust settled slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy, but this time it was a good kind of heavy. Wyatt walked towards Lydia, who emerged from her hiding spot, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes bright with victory. A wide, tired smile spread across Wyatt's face, a smile that hadn't touched his lips in years. Lydia met him, and for a moment they simply stood, breathing in the clean air, the last traces of fear fading away. They had won. They had faced a terrible danger, and together they had overcome it. Looking at each other, they saw not just the shared victory, but a deeper truth. The world was still big and sometimes scary, but they were no longer alone in it. A new feeling, light and strong, filled the empty spaces that loss had left. It was hope, a bright spark, promising a future where loneliness held no power. The quiet ranch, once a place of sorrow, now hummed with the possibility of a new beginning. With the Redmouth riders gone, perhaps for good, a quiet peace settled over Wyatt's ranch. The air, once thick with tension, now carried only the scent of pine and fresh earth. Wyatt and Lydia sat on the porch as the sun began to set, painting the vast Wyoming sky in soft hues of orange and purple. "What now?" Lydia asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Wyatt looked at her, truly looked at the young woman who had brought so much unexpected life back into his quiet world. He saw her strength, her spirit, and the way her eyes now held less fear and more hope. "Now," he said, his voice gentle, "we build." It wasn't just about being safe from the riders anymore. It was about choosing to stay, to mend, and to grow something new from the dusty, sorrowful ground. They spoke of planting a small garden, fixing the barn, and maybe even getting a few more cattle. Small dreams, perhaps, but dreams they could build together. The loneliness that had wrapped around Wyatt for so long, and the fear that had haunted Lydia, began to melt away, replaced by the steady warmth of shared purpose. They had both been lost in different ways, but in finding each other, they had found a path forward. The ranch was still vast, but it no longer felt empty. It was a home, a place where two brave souls could build a new life, free from the shadows of the past, filled instead with the quiet promise of a future together.